I wanted to take a minute and just say hi to everyone and welcome. Um, and of course, thank you all for joining our PI billing webinar today. My name is Sawyer Barkus. I am a marketing coordinator with ChiroTouch, and I'm super excited to be here with you all today. I want to go ahead and extend a warm welcome to Rebecca Scott, who is a certified professional coder, professional compliance officer, and professional biller with KMC, who began her chiropractic career over 30 years ago. Today, Rebecca's going to be focusing on sort of the ins and outs of PI billing. I also want to introduce Dr. Stephanie Brown, who's our software onboarding specialist here with ChiroTouch. Stephanie will be touring the areas of ChiroTouch Cloud that impact PI patients. With that being said, I want to go ahead and pass things over to Rebecca, again, who will be focusing on the ins and outs of PI billing.
Welcome, everyone. We're going to be talking about PI and what you need to know. So the question is, which payer is which, and how do I find out which one to pay? The second one is, what is first-party insurance, and when do I bill that? Finding out, are you in a tort state, a PIP state, or a no-fault state? And that's not a state of mind, but the state that you live in. And from whom do I expect payment along the way, and from whom at the end of the cases? Okay, so let's define what personal injury is. So a personal injury is defined as an injury inflicted on a person's body as opposed to damage or property or reputation. So you're probably already aware that car accidents are PI cases that are the most common, but you may have patients presenting themselves with other types of accidents or injuries as well, and those are also classified as personal injury. So personal injury cases, we want to make sure you know and understand your state law in the state where the clinic resides regarding your personal injury. Again, we need to find out what type of personal injury case it is. We need to have a very strong financial office policy regarding our personal injury cases. And if we have all that in place, we can enjoy the reimbursement for all of your hard work on your PI cases. We need to be knowledgeable about how to handle these cases and how the insurance companies work to ensure your patients get the care that they need and you get the reimbursement that you deserve. So you're probably already aware that car accidents are PI cases, and they are, like I said before, the most common. But you may have patients presenting themselves with other types of accidents or injuries that are classified as personal injury as well. Another common personal injury case is from a bicycle accident. Auto policies, MedPay, or medical payment coverage also protects your patient if they sustain injuries in a bicycle accident. We'll discuss that a little later. And then, of course, similar to the bicycle accident, MedPay can also cover medical costs associated with a pedestrian accident. And slips and falls types of accidents are not just the proverbial banana peel on the floor. A slip and fall can occur at a public location from wet or uneven surfaces, cluttered floors, loose floorboards, defective sidewalks, parking lot potholes, poorly constructed staircases, torn carpeting, recently mopped or waxed floors. These types of injuries would be covered under the business liability insurance policy. A slip and fall injury can also occur at home. For example, a friend trips on your driveway and requires medical care. Your home policy would cover the expenses related to that injury. So you may find that patients who have been involved in an accident can often present as confused, upset, or angry because they don't understand how this frustrating process works. They might even be misinformed. Some patients present an entitlement attitude. You know, they come to the office and say, hey, I was hurt in an accident and I deserve to have all of my medical bills paid. Just know that they are most likely responding from pain and they just want to get better. Your job as a CA is to help assure them that they're in the right place and that we'll help them through this process. So we want to, ease their anxiety and anger and provide them with clarity so they can enjoy a mutual respectful relationship as the case moves forward. So let's begin with the auto accidents, as this is the most common. So we want to understand the components of an auto policy. We want to know state-specific rules regarding auto accidents and medical coverage. And we want to know the difference between that first-party claim and the third-party claim. So components of an auto policy. So best recommendations is always ask the patient to bring in their auto insurance card and their declaration page to their appointment to review as a team and discuss policy and coverage. Liability is a type of car insurance coverage that's legally required in most states. It pays for those medical, property damage, and others that are involved in the accident. This is a sample of a declaration page. So in order to be able to explain to the patient how their own insurance policy works, you must understand the components to an auto policy. So this is a sample of the declaration page, and you may want to consider asking your PI patients to bring in their declaration page and auto insurance card with them so that we can review it. It will be less of a challenge for you to explain it to the patient why you must bill their own insurance when somebody else is at fault once you understand that. So let's look at some of the components of the policy. So liability is a type of car insurance coverage that's legally required in most states. It pays for damaged property, medical care, and lost wages for others as the driver as well as passengers. Bodily injury liability coverage is the part of the insurance policy that pays the costs associated with injuries to the person or people involved in the accident. So property damage is the liability insurance coverage that costs the damage to somebody else's property after the accident. Hopefully that makes sense. So we're also going to talk about or UIM, which is uninsured or underinsured motorist insurance. And that covers injuries such as medical expense when you're hit by somebody who doesn't have insurance. And then, of course, the medical payment coverage, which is what we should be mostly used to, that's the coverage that pays for those medical costs for those that are hurt in the accident, regardless of who is at fault. Additional medical payments may be covered by the patient's medical insurance if they have that policy. MedPay requires coverage is very inexpensive and on coverage that most patients are unaware of. So you can become a great resource to educate your patients about MedPay. That's one reason why we recommend having a copy of your patient's declaration page, because an adjuster will really tell you what their MedPay limits are. And in some states, like I said before, it is mandatory. So I live in the great state of Maine, and it is definitely a mandatory for us that anybody insured in the state of Maine needs to have at least a $5,000 MedPay. So you will also want to understand the surrogate laws in your state because MedPay may be subject to subrogation. And what that means is that there may be another party that pays the bills. The insurance company will want their money back. Often patients will be confused after their case is settled who gets to pay what and how much money they get to keep. So the PIP, or the personal injury protection, is an extension of the car insurance that covers medical expenses and in many cases lost wages. It is often called no-fault coverage because it inherently comprehensive pays out claims regardless of who is at fault in the accident. And then, of course, no-fault insurance often includes or requires personal injury protection, or PIP coverage, which can pay for the insurer's medical care and more after the accident, regardless of fault. Not all states are considered no fault, so you'll want to research your state's status to the fault. It will help you know how to process that claim. So, first party versus third party claims. So the components of the first party claims versus third party claims are very important for you to master so that you can process your patient's claims confidently and appropriately. In a first party claim, your patient uses their own insurance, and they get so confused by this, unfortunately. So, this is your med pay and PIP situation. This will make your patient a first party claimant. A passenger in a car using the car owner's insurance is also a first party claimant. And not to get too complicated, but once the passenger has exhausted the med pay from the car they were in, they can begin using their own car insurance, which is super interesting. So, in a third party claim, your patient is having the at fault party's insurance cover their medical expenses. So, generally speaking, in a first party claim, you can expect to be paid directly from your patient's car insurance. However, in a third party claim, this is not the case. Once a patient has been released from active care, that third party carrier will receive all of the bills and notes, and you can receive full payment directly from them, hopefully. You will want to have some policies and procedures in place to avoid the patient receiving the payment and never paying the doctor. Not that we've never seen that happen before, right? So, tort versus no fault states. So, how do I determine which insurer pays for the damages in a car accident? And it varies from state to state. In the event of an accident, the way in which claims are settled varies by state. States in which both parties involved in the accident receive compensation for their own auto insurance companies and have limited ability to sue, regardless of who is at fault, use the no fault auto insurance system. So that's the no fault. And then typically states that do not employ a no fault auto insurance system uses the tort liability system. In these states, the at fault party is responsible for paying the other party's damages. If a dispute arises, a party may sue to determine negligence in a court of law. You will want to visit your state's insurance commissioner's website to determine what type of state yours is. And while you're there, spend a minute investigating your state's minimum requirements for auto insurance. You always want to know about that. Now we're going to go to our best practices. So, personal injury cases require heightened attention to detail in your office and certainly in your billing and collection department. Smooth billing and smooth procedures are going to be the key to smooth collections. So, you want to utilize policies, procedures that are accepted as being correct and most effective. In other words, best practices. Not necessarily the most popular, but ethical, compliant, and honest. For example, routinely increasing fees for personal injury cases might be a popular practice, but it's not exactly a compliant practice. So, doctors often justify this because personal injury cases require more administrative time than other cases. However, this does not justify billing a higher level E&M code or evaluation and management code. You will want to be sure that your PI patients are treated the same as every other patient in your practice. So, documentation. So, while this is not obviously a course on documentation, it is important to mention this and that practicing robust documentation is most imperative to your successful personal injury cases. It's always a good idea to keep in mind that you document throughout the case will help you justify the care during the case, should you have to testify on behalf of your patient. Who gets the bill? So we need to know your rights and responsibilities. So you're not required to send the bill to a third party carrier. So that's something that's super important too, is as a clinic, you can decide when a patient comes in that's auto accident, whether you decide to take that patient on as a third party. Because once you do have a third party, that means the third party carrier does not pay as the treatment goes along. They do not pay until the care is completed. So that's something to be really mindful of. So we want to work with the patients to help them understand how the system works. We need to explain to them that no matter how nice the adjuster is, they are charged with the role to save the insurance company money. and this is a significant portion of their job. So there really are some great adjusters who want to see the patients get well and stay well, and some just want to save money for their insurance companies. So really making sure you're checking along the way. So always involve the patient's own insurance company or that bill the first party first if we can. So with those first party payers, when you submit the bill and you send the records with that, you'll get paid within a reasonable time. So with the first billing the first party payer, you are not waiting for treatment to be done before you get paid. So again, this is where that $5,000 med pay limit would come in, is we'll want to make sure we bill that first party payer. And again, avoid billing that third party payers if at all possible. The question we get a lot of the time, is it okay to bill health insurance? In most cases, but if you were contracted as a preferred provider, you'll want to make sure you read your contract carefully. A patient can require you to accept what their health insurance pays as full payment. So in this case, say a patient comes in and they have third party and they want you to bill their health insurance. They want you to bill their Aetna. If you are a provider for Aetna, you submit that claim to Aetna, you are going to have to take your contractual obligation and write that off. So super, super important to be mindful of that. And of course, with Medicare, we can't do that. So as we're preparing our claims, we want to call before we submit. So we want to communicate with the adjuster assigned to the claim. We want to verify if there's a med pay if possible. And I always love to not only get the adjuster's name and direct phone number, but I love to ask, do you have a fax number that I can fax claims to instead of having to snail mail them, which is great. And if the attorney is involved, one, making sure that I have that lien and make contact and verify the address for submission. And again, always make sure we have documentation and that we take great notes. And best recommendation is for claims that are third party is that I call every 30 days. I just put that on my tickler list to say, okay, how are things going? Making sure the case hasn't settled, that kind of thing. So notice of lien. So again, this is for those third parties. So a lien for medical care and services gives notice that a healthcare provider has administered medical care and treatment to the patient and that the provider has legally enforceable rights to recover payment for all services performed. So this is where we really want to make sure we get that lien if we are billing that third party. And then with that notice of doctor's lien, we need to have a notice, a doctor's lien is on the way from the attorney. We want to make sure that it's legally binding and that the attorney and the patient understands that once the case is settled, that the payment is going to come to you. And now it's time for a settlement. So settlement of a personal injury claim typically occurs when the patient has been discharged from care. So again, this is for that third party. So when your patient has been discharged, you will want to send a notice of balance to the attorney, the third party insurance company, and the patient. In third party cases, the patient will settle their own claim. In first party claims, payment has been ongoing and settlement does not apply, right? Because we're getting paid as the treatment goes along. When an attorney is involved, he or she will attempt to settle the claim without going to court. Court fees are hefty and they can often dip into the settlement amount the patient may receive. Court cases also significantly delay the settlement process because most courts are inundated with cases. Once a case is settled, the settlement will typically include a portion for the patient, often referred as pain and suffering. This is a monetary amount designated for the physical pain or emotional distress the patient receives. So, and most of the time, I don't think that the providers get the full amount of their bill either. So that being said, that is the end of care. So I think some of the big takeaways that I would like to make sure to stress is making sure that we are in control of how we're doing it, making sure we know what kind of state am I in, and can I bill just first party? Do I have to bill the third party? If I do have to bill the third party, I really want to make sure I get a lien so that my doctor is covered. So that being said, thank you so much. I am going to send it to Dr. Stephanie.
All right, thanks. So we are here in the ChiroTouch Cloud software. And just related to personal injury, we're going to come down to settings so we can just talk through a few things here. So in our billing settings under payer maintenance, of course, you've got your third-party payers here. Most people assume, of course, that your health insurance companies will be here. But you will notice there are a couple payers in my system that are not necessarily insurance companies. So we've got Joe Lawyer here. I'm going to click once to open up that payer. I just made a nickname so I knew who he was, but this is really creating that law office as a payer. So in Cloud here, if I want to be able to reflect that the attorney's office sent me the money, I would want that attorney set up as a payer in my payer maintenance. For financial classification, I just have other liability selected since, of course, that lawyer is not going to fit in these other categories here. You can certainly get that contact info in. And then there's even an option to print that claim form. Some attorneys actually want that claim form. So if you want to print it out of the cloud here, that is built into the system. So you don't need to load those forms in your printer. And if this happens to be a lawyer who does not want claims, maybe they just want super bills, you can actually disable the claim feature so that it doesn't send them any claims at all. This way, they will not accumulate in your claims work list, which of course would take up space and make you think you have to do something with those when you don't. So that's how you can set up the attorney as a payer. And then I'm just going to jump down to my State Farm down here. So I have State Farm in as an auto payer. So it's very important. If it's auto, you're selecting auto as the classification here. Just for a moment, let's pretend it was a workers' comp. So I'm going to select workers' comp. And I'm just going to click over to claims submission and scroll down and just show you guys that if you happen to be in New York State doing New York State workers' comp, they do have a requirement where they want that workers' comp board case number in box 9A. So as soon as you select workers' comp for a payer, this option becomes live. And if you're in New York, you can come enable this here. Now this payer though is auto. So we're going to leave this as auto and it's at the bottom. So we'll switch it back. And these are the two I'm going to give an example for. So one more spot, actually, you can enter your attorneys here in organizations. And this will let you add them as a guarantor in the patient's profile if you need to track it that way as well. So if we go back out to our practice, we're going to jump into Hamilton Lillian here, who has a lot going on. So Hamilton's an established patient who has health insurance, but they were also in an auto accident and they have retained an attorney. I don't need to enter this lawyer right out of the gate if I don't think they're going to be sending me any money at any point. But if you have a feeling that it will eventually go that way, of course, you could get them in whenever you'd like to. Next, we're going to come over to cases. So step one would be to get your payers in. And then we're going to come to cases. So I have created an MVA case. So I'm going to click once and open that up. The name field is up to me. So most offices I work with just have a standard nomenclature that they like to go by when they name these cases. So we use MVA in this example. You will want to select the purpose of this case. So if it's PI, it's probably going to be employment, auto, or other. And again, if I need to add a separate guarantor, I could go ahead and get that attorney in there. And then our insurance here. So if this were a brand new case, it would have loaded that patient's Blue Cross and Blue Shield policy. But that's not, their Blue Cross and Blue Shield in my example is not going to have anything to do with their auto accident. So I skipped over it, and I've got State Farm in that first position and the attorney in the second. Now, again, if I don't want to be sending anything to the lawyer right out of the gate, I could just leave it as State Farm. And then your very important dates are all down here. So you'd want to make sure that these are filled out accordingly. And then you've got your case set up. So I actually already did this visit. So let's schedule another one here. And you can even customize your appointment types. So, my default is chiropractic adjustment, but maybe I have a separate appointment type for my PI patient so they stand out on my schedule. And I'd also like to point out that the case is loaded here by default. Now, let's say this patient was in a car accident and they hurt their back, but you are still going to see them for their neck and use their regular health insurance. Then you would just select the empty space to take the case off of that appointment. But we're going to check in with our case today, or I'm sorry, schedule. So we're going to schedule our patient. And now we can see their visit here. We're going to check in. Again, on that check-in screen, I'm confirming that I'm checking them in with that case. And that is how I can see that it's going to go to State Farm. Again, if they were coming into the office for a different reason, so they were using their regular health insurance for something else, or they're coming for a self-pay service that has nothing to do with their auto accident, which I wouldn't recommend necessarily. We all know it's maybe not the greatest idea, but we'll just pretend for the moment. You can handle why they're coming in independently of that accident if it wasn't involved. So also notice we're leaving their Blue Cross and Blue Shield on, so we're not shutting it off. This way it's hanging out for us when we're ready to use it next. But for the time being, they're coming in for that auto. So we got that case filled in and we can see State Farm and we're going to check them in. If we go to check out, we're just going to be seeing those same details that we're confirming here. I've got my charges, diagnosis and whatnot is at the bottom here, and then we'll just check them out. And then we're going to jump back to that patient's profile. And I just want to show how to get out a super bill if that's what you have to send out to your attorneys. So you would come right here to balance and then super bills, and you would say generate new. And then if you would prefer a case statement, you can actually generate that right from inside the case itself. So if I open up the case and I come to case statements, I can click generate new. Now I know that accident was August 5th and I just want everything in my system from today back to that accident date. I can make extra selections here as needed, and then I would just click generate. And so I've got my itemized statement of all the charges for this person with their diagnosis, and then my office's details that I can send to that attorney. If you are generating claims for those services, then they're going to be accumulating here in your claims work list, and you would send these out exactly the way that you would as if they were just, regular claims. The only other item to touch on is I've got, again, they have health insurance. We're not using it right now. We're going to be using that auto case for the foreseeable future. So on my billing tab, I'm actually going to say, let's override my default of insurance with that case. And now this time, anytime I schedule that patient, it's going to default to have that case with that auto insurance attached. Of course, you can change it at check-in if needed or when scheduling, but this will help make sure it's going to be connected to that visit moving forward. So that's everything I wanted to cover with how PI interacts with Cloud. And Sawyer, I'm sending it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Stephanie. Super, super awesome. We definitely have a lot of fun questions in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and start with our first one, which is essentially, what if the patient had an accident in Texas, but they live in Montana and they're seen in Montana? Will that fall under MT laws or Texas?
So I'll answer that. So it all depends on So if the patient is being treated in that state, one, you would want to verify their coverage. So it really goes by where their coverage is, not necessarily where they're being treated.
Can we have MedPay and PIP on the same insurance policy?
One, you'd want to build that MedPay first, because MedPay is that first party. So where you get paid as the patient is getting treated versus that third party, or the PIP, is you kind of wait.
Alrighty. I also have in Utah, what if the patient's attorney insists the medical slash chiropractic care be billed through the patient's personal health insurance and not the auto medical insurance? Followed
So
up
I
with what are the pros and cons?
Right. So definitely, so one, making sure we have those good policies in place, right, is so super important. If so, my next question would be is, are you contracted with that patient's medical health insurance? Like I said, if you're enrolled or participating with Aetna and you send it to Aetna, you're going to be responsible for those contractual obligations. So bill goes out at $50, your contract says they only allow $30, patient has a $20 copay, you're really only getting reimbursed $10 for that $50 charge, because the patient, I'm sure, is not going to pay their $20 copay. And I would also want to make sure your provider contract allows you to bill for those services that are due to an auto accident. And like Dr. Stephanie said, making sure in ChiroTouch that you put in that it's due to an accident. And some third party or some health insurances may not pay if they see on that claim form that it's due to an auto accident or an accident.
Gotcha. And then sort of a follow-up to that one is, can the doctor insist to bill through the auto insurance?
Well, I mean, you can definitely insist. You can just say, "Hey, our policy is we bill MedPay," and then you can also say, once their MedPay is exhausted, then you're a cash patient, because we don't bill health insurances for auto cases. And then the patient just becomes a cash patient and pays at the time of service.
Okay, great. And then we also had, this is sort of like a three-part, we had a comment that says, unless your state practices Ridley law decision like Montana. We also had a comment that said some insurance deny claims if there's an open auto case.
Mhm.
And then followed up why, so we shouldn't take their health insurance on a PI case. Not really sure if we have an answer there, but Rebecca, any insight?
Yeah, I always try to steer away from billing health insurance. One, because you have to, if you're a provider, you have to follow that provider, that contract, and you have to do your contractual obligation. And I feel like my doctor's time is worth the full amount that he or she should be able to get. So that's part of our office policy, is we do not bill health insurance for auto claims.
Gotcha. Thank you for that.
Yes.
Next question we have up here is, when auto insurance benefits are exhausted, then we kick things over to health insurance, right?
So I do not. So in my clinic, I don't bill the health insurance. So again, we have to check with that health insurance contract, because if in your provider contract, your participating provider, they may not cover if the care is due to an auto accident. And that's where we kick it to actually patient, and patient's responsible for those charges.
Okay. And then sort of follow-up question. So here's the question in its full sort of, when auto insurance benefits are exhausted, then we kick things over to the health insurance, right? But do we still check the auto box on the claim form?
So that's a doctor, right? If the doctor says that this care is still deemed due to that auto accident needs to be checked that it's due to the auto accident.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. A couple
Yes.
more questions here. I know we still have a little bit of time left. Does a provider have to accept the rates if there is a Lockhart lien in place per attorney and insurance adjuster?
So I'm not really sure what a Lockhart lien is. So my question would be is, I would want to follow up. I would want to make up some phone calls and say, okay, attorney, do I have to take this? Sometimes when we do bill those third parties, they'll come back saying, hey, will you take a 50% hit of what your full fee is? And I always like to say, well, what is your cut? how much are you going to cut from your bill for that? So again, I think it's state to state specific, and really just making sure that you understand, I would call the attorney and just verify that.
Awesome. Next question. What do I do if the MedPay/PIP provider reduces fees? I'm not contracted with them.
So I would contact that MedPay and say, I'm not a contracted provider. Do I have to take the contractual obligation? You may have to still write that off based on that EOB because you did submit the claim.
Gotcha. And then not really sure if we have an answer for this, but we did have a question that says, what if your practice is a cash practice? Not sure if we had any more insight or information to pass there, because it's not a very, maybe if there's more specifics around what you're experiencing with the cash practice, we might be able to provide some insight there.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a cash practice, you just wouldn't accept PIP patients or auto claims. Or the patient just pays cash.
There we go. Next question, does attorney and patient have to sign the lien prior to treatment?
So again, that would be based on the lien. I like to get my liens. I don't do liens, but I would think that you would want to get it just as soon as possible and check with the attorney and making sure the attorney understands that the clinic is going to get paid. And that's what that lien is. It's just to be able to cover yourself. I don't know how many times that, we didn't get the lien and then patients just took off and went to Cancun and never paid us. So that's why we don't do that anymore.
Totally makes sense. Let me see. I think this one would be for Stephanie, I believe. It says, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it says, how can we run an aging report for PI and MedPay cases?
So in classic aging report, if you go to I always ran classic reports from the front desk. So go to your front desk at the bottom, billing statements and reports, slide over to that report tab, scroll down, and you'll see there's 3 aging reports, and they're all next to each other. One is aged patient receivables. The other is aged payer receivables. That's probably the one you'd want to pull. Depending on how you have your cases and your billing and PI stuff set up, just go through that report and you're going to be finding either those insurance companies that are payers or the attorneys if you have them set up that way. There may be some additional reporting if you go to I call it the ribbon. I don't know if that's the technical right term, but the hand with the hanging down thing. There is a reports option in there too. And there may be something in there that you like better. I think they have some reports by case type also if you wanted to do that. In cloud here, if you come up to analytics and then reports, we have those payer accounts receivable would be for your aging. And then if needed, there's an attorney patient list. And then also we get this question a lot over on our dashboard. If you come to patients, and then to the right, we have patient cases by status. I'm going to click once on that visual and then click to details. And I've got a list here now of every patient in my system. And the case name is right here. So if you're using something really specific, you can click this field to alphabetize these and go to find, what you want. If you want everything named MVA. The other thing that's really nice is, let me shrink this down. The care type is also a field that you can filter by. So if I just click once to alphabetize these, then I can go through, oh, hang on. Let me refresh, guys, because it's doing both and I didn't want it to do that. Okay, if I click once here, there we go. I got all my autos now next to each other. I can export this into an Excel spreadsheet and then maybe work with it as needed. There is the raw data is all here. So there's columns you could just delete once you have that in that spreadsheet, but this is a different way that you can track some info down about your PI cases in your system.
All right. And then Stephanie, while we're already kind of chatting about the software, I did have a question that says, how are claims being sent electronically? Is that via email, payer ID?
Yeah, Rebecca might have some comment here. So I'm in New York State, and we always dropped our auto and workers' comp claims to paper and put them right in the mail. I'm with Rebecca. If you can talk to that adjuster and get a fax number that they like, I would do that. And then I have seen some cloud offices that we work with, depending on their clearinghouse and how they have things set up. They may have a package that allows them to submit those claims electronically through the clearinghouse, but you would have to speak to your clearinghouse about that to see if that's something they can accommodate.
That's exactly right, Dr. Brown. It's exactly what I would have said.
Yeah. And also, when you send an electronic claim, you're never sending the notes with it. They don't get attached. So if you do have to submit notes with your bills and you're going to do electronic claims, you do want to try to make sure that you're still going to be pulling those notes to send in however that payer wants you, or however they really provide for you to get those notes sent in.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for that. I'm going to continue on. I know we have a few more minutes. Everybody, this is always such a hot topic, and there are always so many amazing questions that come in. So we'll try to tackle as many as we can. Next question we have here is, I've noticed that auto insurance is not paying for re-exam to evaluate care plan. Do we need modifier 25?
Are you adjusting at the same time? Because obviously, if you're adjusting on the same day that you're doing an exam, that 25 modifier needs to be on that claim, absolutely, on the E&M service, because that's what's showing that it's separate and identifiable.
Awesome. And hopefully that answers the question. If not, let us know in the chat. We can try to circle back around. Next question I have here. Do we have to collect from patient at time of service / patient responsibility if we are billing health insurance, or can we hold balances until settlement?
So my question would always be a question back to that patient or that client is, what does your contract say? Because I bet in your payer contract, it says that you need to collect that copay at the time of service. And that's what your contract would say.
Next question I have here. Is the lien and LOP, letter of protection, one in the same?
I would check with your state, but I think the answer is yes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Next one I have here in the chat. How do we cover ourselves with a third-party payer who we don't have a lien with a lawyer? Can we write up a lien with a patient?
You would have to check your state. I would check with your state to see if that would be a legal document if it's not by a lawyer.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
We have follow-up question to MedPay / PIP reduction. If MedPay reduces reimbursement, am I able to keep the balance on the books / lien?
So again, that depends, because I know on some states, like I know with Florida PIP, that they pay 80% and then the patient is supposed to pay the other 20%. And it actually says that on the EOB when you get it back. So really important thing is to read that EOB or that explanation of benefits when you get it, to just ensure that you can do that. If it comes back as a CO or a contractual obligation, you are required to write that off.
Awesome. Thank you here. Just going up through our chat again, making sure that we have covered everything. Let's take a look here. I know we have a lot of questions. Okay, if we have a if we bill third party, how do we get paid? Do we have to wait until all services are rendered?
Yeah, that's part of the third party, which is why we recommend doing that first party if there's any way possible.
Gotcha. Next question, are we required to bill the patient's medical insurance after their PIP runs out?
No.
Okay. I love this. Short, sweet, no, yes. This is perfect. That's awesome. All righty. If MedPay denied follow-up visit, do we bill the patient?
It depends on the denial. Why was it denied? Was it denied because of medical necessity? Because if it was denial because of medical necessity, then the health insurance isn't going to cover it either. And that would be a contractual obligation.
Gotcha. I also have any policy recommendations for third-party claims, aka when the patient gets paid out and doesn't pay the office of or for the services.
Collections. Yeah, I know. So no, I don't really have anything to really, I don't know.
Yeah, that's all good. How do you go about getting a lien?
So hopefully the patient would have an attorney or that you're working with an attorney. And if you're having a lot of PI cases, I would just say, do you have an attorney that you work with a lot, and just see if they would be able to draft you up a lien, and, is that something that you can do in your state? So that's how I would do it.
Awesome. Thank you.
And the state and the board on your state, going to that insurance board, they might have a copy of the lien too if you go to your state website.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Next question. This is from Vanessa. She goes, what is the best way to handle cases that were referred to us by the attorney, but then the attorney withdraws and the patient has been treated and they have a bill? I know that's kind of loaded.
It is very loaded. Well, the patient is ultimately responsible. So I would check with the patient and hopefully set up a payment plan or something. Patient's ultimately responsible.
Awesome. Thank you for that. What if the lawyer asks us to bill health insurance, but we are not in network with the health insurance?
So I would just say, again, that would be an office policy. Do you bill for out-of-network benefits? And that would be considered an out-of-network benefits if that's the case. I would not recommend it, but that is Rebecca, not KMC University. So
all right.
Thank you all
No
very much. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much,
you.
Rebecca, and thank you to Stephanie as well. I just want to thank everybody for their time. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day, and thank you again for attending. I hope you learned a lot, and we thank you again for choosing to spend your morning and afternoon with us.